terms of stuff, welcome to the current episode of Epistemology. I've got my microphone thing working finally, so I'll record the PowerPoint and the audio and then have it available on Canvas. I do have recordings from 2019, but they were from like a camera at a terrible angle with really bad sound. So this will just be good PowerPoint and maybe okay sound. No problems. Before heading to our new stuff, which is also pretty old, anything about the stuff that's been or stuff that shall be that needs more stuff. Okay, so the upcoming stuff in terms of work, there's the quizzes part 1 covering part 1, the exam 1 covering part 1, and then the assessment stuff, the pre-survey and pre-test. And again, for the coursework, always check the due date, which is when you should do it. Then there's the available until date, which is when it'll be available until. And all that's all on Canvas. But the Canvas syllabus thing, the calendar thing, will just show due dates for the most part. Okay, so last time we're looking at our good dead friend Plato and his epistemology, metaphysics. And even though these are separate areas, you've got theory of knowledge, you've got metaphysics, which is about what is really, really real. In the before fairly recent times, they were kind of smushed together, like peanut butter and chocolate in a peanut butter cup. So Plato ends up, because of his concerns about his epistemology, he ends up accepting these forms, which probably seem kind of strange because they're real. They're the realest of the real from real. They're objective, independent, and changing, and they're not here. They don't exist in space. They apparently don't exist in time. And so there's a question of, you can't even say that they're where or when, so it's kind of mysterious. One of the classic criticisms of Plato's forms is what's called the participation problem. Namely that if these things exist in Platonic heaven or Platonic hyper, whatever, how do they interact here? And people who are critical of Plato say that's a big problem, and people like Plato say, no, it's not. That's kind of how the debate goes. Now, in terms of why Plato is doing this, why create a metaphysics, an associated epistemology where there is like a perfect timeless changeless realm, then there's a world we live in which is changing and imperfect and unknowable. Why do that? But it's a good question. So one of his big motivations, of course, is his epistemology. Given his assumptions about knowledge, he believes if we know anything, we've got to have this separate reality that we know about. And then we accept this because this seems like probably here. Another motivation is because of change. The paradox of change is that even though change, of course, is change, change requires that something remain unchanged. Because if everything changes, it's not actually change, it's destruction. So even within change, something must remain the same. And again, it's kind of maybe a minor point, but it does seem true because total change would not be change, but destruction. And so something must remain the same. And so Plato's solution is kind of that, that the forms stay the same and everything else changes. Now, as I mentioned before, Plato was also influenced by two other really dead philosophers, our good dead friend Heraclitus and our good dead friend Parmenides. Heraclitus was the fire god. He believed the world is fire, both literally metaphysically fire, but also metaphorically always changing. Parmenides was a guy who believed that nothing changed. And his famous student was Zeno, and Zeno's famous paradoxes. And so Plato basically does a peanut butter and chocolate thing with these guys and says, well, why not do both? And so the world we live in for Plato is the world of fire, the world of Heraclitus, constant change, nothing stays the same. The world of the forms is the world of Parmenides. There is no change, everything always stays the same forever and ever. So the world we live in is changing, imperfect, and it's the, oh, sorry.
Is Plato where we get like platonic relationship from?
Yes, kind of, because he wrote a, well, transcribed the dialogue on love, and he goes through there's various conceptions of love, and so we have the notion of there's like romantic love and there's non-romantic love, and so because of Plato's distinction in his philosophy of love, we kind of get that notion. So when someone says Platonic, although technically Plato had both types of loves, discuss them, Platonic is the non-romantic love. Yep, so yeah, he's the guy. So as we saw before, these particulars, well, it's us. Everything around us, the world we live in, are the particulars. And Plato believed, which seems correct, that this world comes in degrees. There's more beautiful, less beautiful, more just, less just, bigger, smaller, etc. And so in his metaphysics, these forms make all this happen. So why is a desk a desk? It participates somehow in the form of desk. These us, particulars and other things here with us, somehow resemble the forms, however that works. And this comes again in degrees. And I used before the metaphor of like photocopying. And so there's like higher quality copies and lower quality copies. And in terms of his epistemology, the forms also group things. So chairs are chairs because they somehow participate in the form of chair, but we also recognize chairs as chairs because of our understanding of the form of chair, or so he claims. Now, one of the things that Plato, many things he's known for, in addition, of course, to your point, Platonic love, is his classic line, which is considered from the Republic, and probably best known for the allegory of the cave, which in addition to Descartes' meditation was kind of the foundation of the original Matrix movie. So in the Republic, Plato is talking about metaphysics, what is real, and epistemology, how do we know? And he heads towards his famous line and cave. So he draws a distinction between philosophers, and literally philosophy means philo, love, Sophie, wisdom, literally means love of wisdom. And he believes there's like two types of people, lovers of wisdom and lovers of opinion. So as you might imagine, him being a philosopher, he favors the philosophers. So he begins by kind of like laying out his metaphysical view, his epistemology, the following way. So he notes that if you're talking about beauty and ugly, that they're two things. And he does, kind of some obvious math. Since they're two, each one is one. So there's beauty, there's ugliness. And here he makes kind of his allusion to the particulars. And he says there would be like perfect beauty. And interestingly, even though he brings up the ugly, he kind of doesn't like have a form of ugly, but I guess he kind of has to. And he says the many things are not perfectly beautiful, nor perfectly ugly. They're like in an intermediate between them. So in this world of particulars, the lovers of opinion, they see the many. As to say, they don't see true beauty, he claims. They see the many beautiful things. I guess also the many ugly things. And he uses the metaphor of a dream about how people who love these sights and sounds, they are essentially like functionally asleep. Not really asleep, of course. And one who's truly awake sees absolute beauty. So he's drawing here, moves on to draw the distinction between knowing stuff and simply having opinion. And being Plato, of course, he's got a lot of arguments. So here's his arguments as to why knowledge is not opinion. We saw it back before. Plato was fighting over, trying to beat the relativists, which he thinks he did, trying to beat the empiricists, which he thinks he did, and also trying to beat the people who think that knowledge is true opinion. And he goes on to do more of that. So, first thing, the being and non-being argument. So if you know, do you know something?
Yes.
Can you know nothing? Right. And although there's some interesting, paradoxes and problems in philosophy about knowing nothing, because if you know nothing, you know how much. Yeah, you know nothing. But if you know one thing, you don't know nothing. So, language is weird. So he thinks that if you know, you got to know something. You can't know nothing. And he thinks that the absolute beauty is something that therefore he thinks can be absolutely known. And nothing, utterly non-existence, is utterly unknown. So he ends up with this distinction. There's absolute being, and there's absolute nothing. And then there's in between the two. Now for Plato, absolute being is perfection. So perfect, and then here it would be zero, the nothingness. And he believes, because of this distinction, that knowledge matches up with being, absolute being, and ignorance corresponds to not being, which kind of makes sense metaphorically, because if you're ignorant, what do you know? Yeah, nothing. So kind of makes sense. Next, he turns to his spheres and faculties argument. So faculties are powers that we have. Unfortunately, generally not superpowers. And the way we split up these faculties is by their sort of spheres of coverage. We could use, for example, the senses. How do we distinguish between seeing and hearing? What's the difference? Yeah, you have different organs, and do they deal with different things? What is it that we see?
Seeing is sound is hearing things. So, noise. Can't really see noise.
Yeah, exactly, because we see radiation, and we see a certain spectrum. Some creatures can see beyond, they can see an infrared, ultraviolet. In theory, you can even have something that could see radio waves, because we just have a very narrow range. And what we hear is vibration. So we have the sphere of vision, which deals with radiation, and we have the sphere of hearing, which deals with vibration. And of course, interestingly, because of our technology, we can use radiation, radio waves, or Wi-Fi to transmit things that we can then hear by vibrating a speaker, which is how Alexa works. So he believes we split things up by spheres and faculties. And he notes that knowledge and opinion are different things, he claims. And so they have different faculties. Now, interestingly, or boringly enough, there are people who claim they can say like we don't see sounds, but there are people who claim they can like hear colors. And there's a question of like how that works. But interesting problem. So because these things are distinct, he believes that distinct spheres, and here's how he claims they are different. So knowledge, he says, is all about being. Opinion, of course, is to have an opinion. And he believes that opinion is less than absolute, but more than nothing. So it corresponds to that middle ground. Because his reasoning is that each faculty, like I said, like hearing and seeing, it's got its own thing. You don't see colors, you don't see sounds, you don't hear colors. And so he says, you have opinions about stuff and you have knowledge about different stuff. Or so he claims. So then what is opinion about? Well, as we established, if you get an opinion, you get an opinion about something or nothing. So, yeah, something. Although weirdly, the word nothing is kind of a weird word because the person could say they have an opinion about nothing. People could claim they can think about nothing. And of course, supposedly Seinfeld was said to be a show about nothing. Never seen it actually, but I guess maybe true. I've seen clips, but never a whole episode. So you can't have an opinion about nothing. So if you have an opinion, you get an opinion about something. And not being, of course, is not a thing, it's a nothing. So he reasons through clever use of words that opinions are not about nothing, they're about something. Or they're about something less than absolute being, or so he claims. So opinion then, for him, is going to be like an intermediate or a mean between these two extremes. So ignorance is knowing nothing. Knowledge is absolute being, and then opinion is more than nothing, but less than absolute being, or so he claims. And so opinion is that mixed middle ground. So he uses the example of beauty. So is absolute beauty ever ugly? Well, exactly.
Yeah,
Could perfect beauty be ugly?
it depends on how you define it.
True. If you believe in the relativity of beauty, then one could say there is no perfect beauty. It's all how you define beauty of opinion. But if we believe in perfect beauty, which maybe we shouldn't, would perfect beauty be ugly? No, in a way, by definition, it couldn't be. Now, you raise a good point. Maybe there is no perfect beauty. It's all the eye of the beholder or some other factor. But Plato believed, perhaps wrongly, that beauty was like real, like not only real, but like super real. So, what about here in this world? Think of like the most beautiful supermodel. Are they perfectly beautiful? Models? No. No. Which is why we have Photoshop. Even Photoshopping is not perfection. Yeah, so we realized pretty quickly that things that are beautiful here, as you noted, people see things that are supposedly beautiful also as like not beautiful. Sometimes even ugly. And even when it comes to people who are like supposed to be super beautiful, there are those who say they're not beautiful, even those who say they look kind of like weird or ugly. And so in the realm of opinion, he takes these to be like halfway ideas. That if you see something that's beautiful, it's like here, it's like beautiful, but also ugly too, not perfectly beautiful. And so he takes that to be opinion rather than knowledge. So in this way, we could say, going back, like people of different obviously opinions and views. In this case, people could focus on more on the beauty or more on the ugly. And this is why Plato could say, okay, beauty is like real, but then people have different views on what they're seeing here. So
he's saying that beauty is, so he's making suggestions that beauty is not fact based, it's more opinion based.
he's saying, kind of weirdly both, because Plato did claim that there is a form of beauty. So that beauty itself would be real and objective. And then he says here, all like the particular things, they would be a mix. And so it would be true they have some beauty, but yeah, it would be a matter of opinion whether you thought it was like more beautiful than ugly, like your response to it, because it's a blend. Yeah, so you can have this seemingly kind of weird view where beauty is like a real objective thing, but because it's like mixed up, people will have different opinions about it. And all these opinions in a way they won't be knowledge, and in a way they'll all be kind of like wrong, but also like right, but mostly wrong. Yeah, so it's kind of a weird scenario where beauty is perfectly objective, but beauty here is like mixed with other stuff. So yeah, you would have your opinion about whether someone's beautiful or not. And Plato would say, well, that would be your opinion, but he would say the perfect beauty is still an objective that just you don't see it here. Now, what about the philosophers? Well, Plato, again, is going after people who are, empiricists, and people who think that opinion is just true belief. And he thinks that people who have opinions and not knowledge they see the many things, but they don't see the absolute. So, going back to your point, they would say beauty is just opinion because everything is like in degrees, and you could debate about like nothing is perfectly beautiful. So a person could fairly say, that model is not beautiful. In a way, they'd be right. They're not perfectly beautiful. And so Plato thinks they're kind of right, but that's only because they don't see they don't see beauty. They don't understand the form of beauty. So what about the philosophers? Well, he thinks that philosophers get the distinction that the many things here are things you experience with your senses, but you don't know them, which is why looking at people or paintings or whatever, it would be a mix of beauty and ugly, and people would say, well, it's beautiful to me, someone else would say, no, it's ugly to me, in a way they'd all be like kind of right. But Plato would say, aha, they're doing it wrong. That the absolute beauty in all absolutes, all the forms, are things but you can never see. So you can never see perfect beauty because it's not here to be sensed. But he believes that the way you know beauty is not by looking like at supermodels on Instagram, but by philosophical knowledge. So and it wouldn't look like, maybe we're like, what would it look like? And the answer, like, it wouldn't look like anything because none of these forms are like things you could physically see. Now, Plato, like all philosophers, loves analogies. So he first draws an analogy to the eye, and he says the soul is like the eye, and he believes that it has to turn towards the light to see, and of course, there's different types of light. Moonlight is, of course, in reality, of course, you can kind of see by it, but actually there technically is no moonlight; it's just reflected sunlight. which is why vampires should explode when exposed to moonlight, because it's sun. So that should do it. Unless it's like magic, in which case, different rules for magic. Also turns werewolves into werewolves, but moon, the sun should do the same thing. It messes up the whole werewolf vampire thing. Science ruins everything. So the moonlight, of course, is like faded and lighter, and the sunshine is brighter. And he thinks the soul is looking at like the sun, although not directly, is like seeing this truth. And being in the moonlight is in what he calls the twilight of becoming or perishing. So naturally, he, of course, includes the sun analogy. So for Plato, and there is a picture of it, this doesn't show up very well, but
Well, I see it, yeah.
very faded. There's actually a sun back there. It's kind of like in the Blizzard games. They always have you adjust your gamma until you can't, you just barely see it. I think only, most Blizzard definitely does that for their games. Other gaming companies, maybe. I just remember always having to, whenever I played Diablo or something, I always have to adjust the gamma.
Call of Duty did it.
Yeah.
Yeah, makes sense. You get the perfect view. So the sun analogy. So for him, we of course have the physical sun, but there's the metaphorical sun. And he takes the metaphorical sun to be the good. So he also, when it comes to ethics, he also takes the view that not only is there objective reality, the good is the greatest. It's like, even like the forms are all perfect, but the good is, they have like a hierarchy, they're all perfect, and the good is the top. It is the supreme form. So he uses this metaphor, namely that to show that things like science and truth are like the good, but not the good, and the good is the greatest thing. Now, his student Aristotle later accepts this as well, but there, of course, is a debate in ethics about like what is the good. And one popular view that Plato argues against is that pleasure is the good. Now, later, centuries later, this guy, John Stuart Mill, English guy, develops utilitarianism. He actually argues that pleasure is the good. So he's got to go back and fight with Aristotle and Plato. I mean, metaphorically, I guess he would have won that one. But no, he's dead. But anyways. So much like the sun, he takes the good to be analogous. So like the sun lights up the physical world. He was aware, it provides like, they didn't know about like, chlorophyll, that kind of stuff. But, people have figured out pretty quickly the sun provides the energy we need to live by, etc. And so he draws that analogy. The sun in the physical world is like the good in the super Plato world. Now we turn to his famous line. So in the Republic, the character of Socrates draws out a line in the dirt, and it's described in the Republic. Some editions actually draw it out, but in the original, of course, it's just because they didn't really have a good way to reproduce drawings then, except by drawing them by hand. So here's the line. Now, it's uneven, but that's actually intentionally so, because in the description, Plato quoting Socrates, describes it this way. They're different lengths. And unlike the grading scale, A is worst, D is best. So I guess one could say, they did very well on the Platonic scale. So this division, he has a 4-part division of both metaphysics, the reality, and knowledge, the epistemology. As I said, Plato Plato and many philosophers up until fairly recently didn't split those apart. You had your metaphysics and your epistemology, and they were strongly connected. So let's start at the worst part. So level A for Plato is the realm, well, for each one he has kind of like what's there metaphysically. And for the metaphysics, there also corresponds a mental faculty, like what you use to like engage that stuff. So level A is the realm of images. And it's engaged with by our imagination. And I always think of the South Park episodes. That's a really old show. That was around like 1,000 years ago. Super weird to think of it as being that old, super old. Simpsons. They started in 1989 on a show that doesn't exist anymore, Tracy Ullman show. They've been around a super long time. I think they're still going, right? Yeah. They said they're just not going to stop. It's going to be around. They'll be the last thing, like a million years from now, there'll just be episodes of Simpsons being broadcast into space. The aliens will be like, what is going on with this planet? It's haunted by the Simpsons. Anyways, I'm sure Matt Groening made a ton of money off that. I hope. I don't think he even draws it anymore. Anyways, back to the images and imagination. So this level would be things we generally think of as like images. It would be, Plato, of course, didn't have film, photography, or holograms, etc. But he would include here things like shadows, as well as things like art would be here as well. Now, art, of course, can be both, as we'll see, a physical object, but you can also look at it in terms of it being an image. So, like a statue of a person would be a physical object, like a stone or metal, but of course it's not an actual person. Likewise, like a drawing of a pizza would be like physically paper, ink, etc., but it wouldn't be like an actual pizza. So for Plato, these would be like dreams, hallucinations, shadows, and art. All art for Plato lives here in the realm of the imagination. Now, as the examples of like shadows and hallucinations and dreams show, Plato thinks that these things, they do exist, but just very. Now, he doesn't, again, he's not saying that like statues don't exist, but they're like lesser, like the drawing of a pizza is less than an actual pizza. A statue of a person is not a person, it's just an image. The shadow of a person is not a person, it's just a shadow. And in other parts of the Republic, interested in aesthetics and censorship, Plato gives the argument, kind of the Platonic argument, literally for censorship. It's one that's used to this day. He argued that the art affects people emotionally, and it kind of sneaks past your reason, gets to your emotions, and corrupts you. So if you see things that are like violent, you'll become violent. And of course, that's the exact argument we hear today. If you play a lot of video games, you'll become violent.
I disagree with it.
Yeah, it's probably not. If you talk to people who actually do the research, they say, nope. They do know that if when you play like a violent video game, your adrenaline goes up a bit. But that's, of course, exactly what you would expect in a violent
If I give you that same argument, I would say if I play Madden, I'll be good at football. But I'm not good.
Unfortunately, no. Unfortunately, it's not. Yeah, I mean, the science seems to be, no, it doesn't make people violent. Yeah, and as you said, it doesn't, I mean, you might get better at shooting stuff in Call of Duty or something, but people are not more inclined, as far as I know, to engage in violence. But it's a popular thing that comes up every so often. It comes around, and people push it. Which is why I've always been mad. One of the many reasons I've been mad at Hillary Clinton, because she came out hard against video games back in the first Grand Theft Auto. And that made it very personal. Not that I like Grand Theft Auto, video games. I was like, Hillary, why are you turning on us like this? She thought it would get her votes, but it did not. That might be why she lost. She lost the critical video gamer vote. Probably not. Probably none of that's true. But anyways, yeah. So for Plato, he gives that argument about art corrupting people, but it doesn't seem to be borne out by actual fact. So Plato was probably wrong. Now the next step up, oh, also, as you might imagine, he was also kind of against art, or critical of it, because art is like the least of things, and he believed it could be like deceptive and bad. Although he was kind of reluctant about it because he actually did really like art, and apparently he was a poet, and he really, really wanted to keep art, but he thought it was super dangerous. So it's kind of like someone who has like a dog they really like, but the dog keeps like, they think the dog like murders people. They're like, I really like my dog, but it keeps killing people. So, but I really want to keep the dog. Level B is physical phenomena. That's, and again, like a statue could be both, a physical object of stone or metal, but also would be an aesthetic or art object, being of a person. And this would be the stuff, well, we see here, tables, chairs, kiwis, the bird, the fruit, the New Zealander. Interestingly, there are 3 types of kiwis. 2 connected, 1 not. I think it's all spelled the same. Yeah, kiwi fruit, kiwi bird, kiwi New Zealander. So this corresponds for Plato to belief. So metaphysically, these are physical things, and we have opinions about them. But he believes not knowledge. So one implication for Plato is you can never actually know where your keys are because you can never know anything about the physical world. I mean, informally, of course, we use the word know formally, but Plato would say you can't know anything about the physical world. This made Aristotle kind of mad because Aristotle kind of embraced a bit of empiricism, and he thought you could know stuff about the world. And Plato thinks you can't. Next level up, level C, the mathematics. So, oops. So level C for Plato, and he kind of changes his mind throughout the dialogues, like how many categories of forms there are. And sometimes he says, there are these levels, and sometimes he doesn't. It's kind of similar to, if you're familiar with the kind of theology or metaphysics of angels. There's kind of the traditional views, you get angel, you get God, angels, people. But then if you look at sort of the people who are really into studying angels, there's all kinds of different orders, cherubs, seraphims, archangels, etc. And so he's kind of like that. He's like, sometimes he really splits them up into distinct categories, and sometimes you just go like all the forms together. So when he did the Republic, he was in his different types of forms phase. So interestingly, sneezing is not a symptom of COVID. So it's the one thing you can do, and people get scared, but it's not actually anything to do with COVID. It's basically, I think ironically, sucking in all the particles off this, spraying off this mask into my nose. So the mask is making me sneeze. So, mathematicals. So Plato thinks that in level C, in some of his dialogues, so this one, he has forms come in varying like levels, kind of like the angels. So he's got the mathematicals, which are math stuff, and also what he calls the lesser forms. Then there are the greater forms, and then of course the top of the heap is the greater. So level C, this is kind of like mathematics, logic, etc. And this corresponds to Plato to the faculty of what he calls intelligence. So what's going on at level C? Well, he says C has 2 main things going on. First, we use visual symbols to represent those things. This is most evident in the case of like the mathematicals and the geometry, because when we do math, we use like numbers and plus signs and minus signs, etc. Or when we do geometry, we do draw triangles and so forth. So kind of thing one is we use visual symbols to stand in for these things. And of course, the symbol is not the thing, it's just a symbol of the thing. Secondly, this is the realm of proofs. If you do geometry and did those geometric proofs, or if you've taken like the logic class and done proofs in logic, or done like math, and you do mathematical proofs, that's this level. So you use symbols, and you can use essentially what we call today deductive reasoning to prove things. So as long as you start off with truth and go step by step, you can get to truth. So as he sees it, we're thinking about these mathematicals, these lesser forms, and we're using symbols to do so, and we're doing step-by-step proofs. We can show our work. And for him, this would be the level of knowledge. You can know this stuff. But then he has above it another level, line D, which are like forms, but I guess they're like the greater forms. I think the Magista Gente, I think, is the bad Greek. my bad. Trying to say what it is. This would be the forms like beauty, justice, and of course the good. So if level C is about symbols and going through step-by-step proofs, what about level D? Well, I think level D is also knowledge, because they're forms. But the hallmark of level D, the highest level, is that you know them not by step-by-step reasoning or symbols. You just see them. They're illuminated in your mind. You are enlightened. Now, that of course creates a super problem, because the level C, you do proofs. How do I know this is true? Here's a proof. I can show my work. By the highest level, you just see the truth. You're illuminated, you're enlightened. And because of this, since Plato, probably before Plato, philosophers have tried, and everybody has had to deal with that idea of, what if someone just says they see the truth and they just know it's true? And you ask them to show their work, and they're like, no, can't show my work, I just see the truth. Well, kind of the challenge there is, and we'll see this when we talk about the ethics of belief, how does a person know that they're seeing the truth, and how do they know they just didn't have like a stroke or something, or drugs, or they're just insane? And the challenge is, of course, that again, with proving stuff, you can show your work. If there's doubts about mathematical proof or logic, you can look at proof. But if someone claims to just see the truth, what can you do? Now, what illuminates all of this is, of course, for him, the good. And of course, I've chosen the image of paladin to represent someone manifesting the good. But nothing for Plato, just paladin. Original paladins. New ones can be like they can be like evil, which is weird. But original ones, lawful good. So we're going with classic good paladins. So the first principle for him is the good. And for him, it is the ultimate form. And he likes that sun analogy, which is, the sun in the physical world is as the good is in the world of the forms. So for him, that's how reality and epistemology breaks down. There is the least of things that exist, but just barely. Then there are the physical things, which you can have opinions about, which exist, but still just barely. There are the lesser forms of mathematicals, which you can know through symbols and doing proofs. And at the highest level, the good just shines on the forms, and you just see them because they're lit up by the good. Which of course leads to our metaphors of enlightenment, the light of truth, the natural light, etc. And as we'll see, when we look at philosophers like Descartes and Leibniz and so on, this becomes kind of like a plague upon philosophy, where people just say, yeah, the light's shining on it, I see it, I know it's true. And then people ask the obvious question, well, how do you know you got it right, you're seeing the light of truth, or how do you know you're just not just totally insane? And tough question. Before going on, anything about the line needs more line stuff. So Plato's next thing is the allegory of the cave. If you've seen the original Matrix, Basically, that's what's going on. That's really low contrast.
Actually, a little bit.
Yeah, it shows up just a tiny bit. Well, because these were created during the pandemic last year, and no one was in the room, so it was just me sitting in the room all alone, clicking through my PowerPoints. Good times, good times. Yeah, so it looks fine on my computer, not good there. I'll have to adjust the gamma. Nope, still terrible. There we go. You can see that. High contrast. So what's going on in Plato's allegory of the cave? So there is the way he describes it. And again, if you've seen the original Matrix, basically it's kind of that story. So Plato asks us to imagine the following scenario. We can imagine a room somewhat like this, where you have people, except they're trapped in their chairs and cannot escape. And instead of having a projector, projecting stuff, because Plato didn't know about LCD projectors, back behind people, there is a wall. Behind the wall, there is a fire, like in an alcove, projecting the light. Then there are people walking, holding sticks with objects on them, and the light is hitting the objects, casting shadows on the wall. And the people back there are making the appropriate noises for the things. And again, what Plato's asking us to imagine, because he didn't know about virtual reality, obviously, or film, he's asking us to kind of imagine a virtual reality. Imagine what later is presented in the movie The Matrix, where it's a world of illusion, shadow, projected. It's not real. So then Plato asks us to imagine someone in the cave, they slip free of their bonds and they're loose in the cave. And they run to the back and they can see the people holding the sticks, and they can see the fire. And then they see an exit out of the cave, so they escape and they get out into the surface world. Now, at first, the person, of course, has been in the dark their whole life, and so the sunlight hurts them. It's like in the original Matrix, when Morpheus, or spoilers for the movie that's 23 years old, when Morpheus rescues Neo, Neo asks, "Why do my eyes hurt?" And of course, Morpheus says, "Because you've never used them." That's directly taken from Plato's allegory of the cave, because the sunlight hurts the eyes of someone who's dwelt in darkness. So first, the person can't look at the sun. Not directly, never do that. But eventually they adjust to the sun, and they're able to live in the outer world. But as I said, the original Matrix, if you've seen it, is basically Plato's allegory of the cave with Descartes' problem of the external world combined together. So how does this work in terms of his metaphysics and epistemology? Well, this, of course, does correspond to his love. So the cave is basically, it occurs in the public after the line, and it's basically sort of presenting the line more dramatically. So when people are initially in the cave, this is analogous to the world of appearance, which is just images, sensations, the world of illusion. And this is kind of the starting point. And then when someone breaks free of the chains and is free in the cave, they're only partially free. They have here belief, they have sense perception, they can see the fire, which is like the physical sun, and this is the realm of opinion. So this is kind of like how we're deceived about everything when we're learning stuff. And then some people kind of break free a bit and start doing like, oh, this would be like the sciences, etc., trying to get to some non-false stuff. Then, of course, once a person gets out into the real world, out of the matrix, these are semi-free. This is the realm, again, mathematics, the lesser forms, etc. And the metaphor is like the moonlight, the reflection of the sun, where the person's eyes cannot directly take it. Then the highest level is being completely free, fully liberated, and this is the ability to stand the full light of the sun. again, in his epistemology, understanding the higher forms, and in his metaphysics, being there with the forms. And so that's his metaphor for the escape from the cave, from the prison of ignorance to the enlightenment of knowledge. And lots of movies have been based on that. Most famously, again, The Matrix. So for him, again, the good is like super important in his metaphysics. So where did everything come from? The good. Everything in the world that is real comes from the good. And as you might suspect, later when Christianity arose, some Christian thinkers reading this thought Plato was talking about God. And there was a view in the Middle Ages that Plato was a Christian before Christ. And of course, there's debate about whether that's true or not. People who reject that tend to think that Christianity and Platonism are similar because Christianity just kind of copied Plato. And then people who think that Plato was dimly seeing, God, etc., make the argument that no, it's Christianity that's right. Plato, being pagan, couldn't see the full truth. And so there was considerable debate in the Middle Ages about Plato and Aristotle. So some Christian thinkers and Islamic thinkers really like Plato, his metaphysics. Other thinkers, later thinkers like Thomas Aquinas, really liked Aristotle. In fact, Aquinas famously physically stole like lots of Aristotle's stuff. Well, he credited some kind of people. So what happens if you've seen the good? Well, again, it's kind of like, the Matrix is based on this, so it's like that. So it's the question of once you're free, there's still lots of people trapped in there. So the original Matrix, Morpheus busts Neo out of the Matrix and rescues him physically, and now they're in the seemingly real world. But of course, almost all of humanity is trapped in the Matrix. So what do? Do you go back into the Matrix to rescue people? Now, it would seem like a really terrible idea to go back for most people. Although one of the many interesting things through the Matrix is one of the characters wants to go back because life in the real world is rough, and they want to be put back into the Matrix, but put back in as like a celebrity or something. So Plato claims that what if someone does go back? And generally people wouldn't want to because they would realize how awful the cave is. And he's kind of foreshadowing from the future in a way. Because in the Republic, what Socrates does through Plato is he foreshadows his own death. You may think, well, how does he do that? Well, the answer is pretty straightforward because Plato wrote this after Socrates died. So he knows what's going to happen. So I guess it'd be interesting to think that maybe he did foresee his death somehow. So Socrates foreshadows that if someone goes back into the realm of shadows and they're forced to fight in the court of shadows, the legal system of the world, they would seem foolish because they have seen and understand absolute justice, and then people here are just playing with the shadows of justice. And they would, of course, seem foolish and ridiculous, and they would probably do very badly. And of course, we know what happens to Socrates. He ends up refusing to play essentially the usual legal game, and he ends up being found guilty and sentenced to death. The Crito, he gives his last philosophical argument, and then he drinks amyloid and, of course, dies. Oh, so. Now, one thing that what he closes with is a notion that's not like super important for epistemology, but important for ethics. So Plato takes the view that it's called the unity of the virtues. And it comes up, as discussion of metaphysics and epistemology, that in a way, both good people and bad people have like seen the good, because we all see the good, because whenever we'll see the next thing, when we're dead, we're hanging out with the good. And so you may wonder, well, if everyone like sees the good, why are there like bad people? So they like see the good and see it and say, wow, that's good, I want to be good. It's kind of like the similar problem in religion called the problem of evil. Namely, if God exists, why is there any evil? Why is there any badness? So Plato here is trying to explain in a way how people can see the good, but still be bad. So much like his student Aristotle, not surprisingly, Aristotle believed that people were born, for the most part, morally neutral. You would become good or bad based on what you do. If you wanted to be brave, you would do, things that were brave things until you became brave. But Plato also believed that in all of us, there is like a divine element. I'm going to later say like divine spark, because we've always seen the good that remains within us. And again, the problem is, what about bad people? What's going on there? Well, if you develop wisdom, not surprising, Plato's a philosopher, so he says if you do philosophy, not necessarily like have it as your job or anything, but if you become wise, then you'll be good, because you'll know the good he believes is to do the good. So if you retain that understanding, understand the good, you'll be good. What about people who've seen the good, but are bad? Well, what he says is this. It's the character that he calls the clever rogue, who has seen the good, but does not understand or know the good. And so they're very good at seeing their way to their end. They have a very keen sight in his metaphor, but their keen sight serves evil. And the problem he presents is they are a danger to the degree they are clever. So Plato's notion of the unity of the virtues is, in order to be like good, you've got to have the complete set. And if a person has got some of them, every virtue a person has, every virtue a person has makes them like more and more dangerous, up until a point where it would actually make them good. So how can this work? Well, we can use fiction. What are some of the classical, best known, best loved, or best hated fictional bad people, villains? Yeah, what's he like?
Very good man.
Yeah, how smart is he?
It's pretty intelligent.
Yeah, he's smart. And in the Batman movies, like with Heath Ledger Joker, he seems incredibly brilliant because he has all these plans that cannot possibly work, but yet they do, everything works perfectly. Is he charismatic? Yeah, he has a lot of good qualities. But is he pretty evil? Yeah. What makes him worse is, of course, he does have, like, if he was like the villain in Smurfs, Gargamel, yeah, he wouldn't be any threat. I mean, kids villains, what are kids villains usually for kids cartoons? Like old style kids cartoons. Yeah, they're foolish, they're bumbling, they're incompetent, and they always fail. Because if you had like a competent villain, that would terrify the kids. Because if you had like the Joker handling Smurfs, that would scar the kids for life. They'd be over the Smurfs right away, and kids would be in therapy. Yeah, so we have for children, we have villains that are like of the lowest type. They have virtually no positive qualities, unless they get like a redemption. Then the villains that people find frightening, like the Joker, etc., they have many positive good qualities, but they're missing. Like I said, he's insane. He's missing some key ones. Yeah, so it's kind of an interesting view that, well, Socrates had the view that evil is a matter of ignorance, and it's a matter of not having all the virtues, to have kind of like seen the good, but not understand the good. And the greatest villains are those who have, the more virtues. Which seems true. I mean, people are much more dangerous who have all kinds of, powerful positive qualities, but are missing things like, ethics and compassion and so forth. Now, I mentioned before how we know about the forms, and this is laid out in Plato's dialogue, the Meno. So the Meno dialogue explains how we people who can't, we can't see the forms, can hear them, hear how we know about them, which is a good question. If they're not here, how do you? And as I mentioned before, spoilers, you hang out with them, we hang out with them when we're dead. So Meno makes the following argument, reconstructed by Socrates. So if you know, you have no need to inquire because you already know. If you don't know, you cannot know, but you don't know the subject about which to inquire. Therefore, you can't inquire about what you don't know, and so you can never get knowledge. So Meno is basically putting forth seemingly like a paradox where you can never learn anything or know anything, because if you already know, there's no need to learn, and if you don't know, you can never get knowledge. So what Socrates is trying to do is explain, how can you know what you don't know? How can you beat that paradox? And he does it in a pretty weird way. So essential to his position is this. And in different, like I mentioned before, there's different views expressed by Socrates, which on one hand is not surprising. People change their views over their life, but a lot of it is probably Plato writing into Socrates. So the Socrates of the Meno seems to accept this notion. Well, here are some critical assumptions. One, you got a soul, or rather you are a soul. You have a body, but you are a soul. It's an important distinction. The soul is immortal, and it gets reincarnated, it gets reborn after death. And it's never destroyed. And those are some major assumptions. And this also kind of shows why medieval Christian thinkers probably looked at Plato and said, this guy's onto something. Because in some forms of Christianity, Judaism, similar view. You get a soul, you are a soul, it's immortal, it's never destroyed. Although only one person gets to be born again after death. Well, two, Lazarus. Lazarus gets raised, and where Jesus comes back. But then I guess the rest of us come back on Judgment Day, depending on your view of how Judgment Day works. So very similar. So how does this fit into knowledge? Listen to what he claims. So you are your soul, you're immortal, you're born again, you can never be destroyed. Really useful powers. So his view is that presumably, I guess, the soul's been around forever. So that means even by Plato's time, there's been a lot of time. So that would mean that people have been born, over and over again. And by now, we're hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of years into human history, depending, I guess, when the souls show up. Maybe we've all been around for 25 billion years. So we're all super old. So this means that we've seen it all. And we have knowledge of everything. So, but here's the problem. If we don't remember anything, then yeah, we wouldn't have any knowledge. But if we do remember stuff, then the obvious question is, why don't we? Yeah, why don't we remember? Why don't we remember what we were doing like in our last life? So he thinks it should be in there. So he's got to solve this problem. On one hand, he's got to claim it's all in there, but he also has to explain why we generally, most of us don't seem to remember it. As far as I can tell, I have no recollection of past lives. I don't seem to have any language skills from my past. I presume that I haven't always been incarnated as an English speaker, so I should have some language skills, which I don't, and other skills too. So here's how he tries to explain that. So what he thinks occurs is that when you're dead, you're hanging out with the forms, etc. When you're alive, you're learning stuff. And then when you're reborn, there's like a shock that doesn't erase your memory, but kind of removes your access to it. To use a computer analogy, if you take like all your files and drag them into the trash or recycle bin, your PC, they seem to be gone. But of course, they're not really gone. Even if you empty the trash, they're still not gone. They're still there. They have been erased. So to use a modern metaphor, it's kind of like that. Being reborn is like all your files get dragged into the trash, but they're still there. And so what can happen is that just like with a hard drive, if you have the right tools, you can restore. I mean, if you just put it in the trash, you can easily take it out. But if you erase a file, there are tools that can recover it. And so you can run that tool, recover that file. And what Socrates is doing, metaphorically speaking, he thinks like the philosophical dialectic is basically a restore tool. It can restore your memories, bring them back. So the way he does this is he talks to Meno's servant and he walks him through these geometric proofs. And I won't go, he grinds through like every single step. So I'll grind through them all. What he claims is this, that the servant knows geometry, but the servant wasn't aware of this because Socrates asked Meno, this person never learned geometry. Meno says, no, never learned geometry. So what he thinks he's doing is the knowledge of geometry is in there, the servant is just not aware of it. And so what Socrates is doing is recovering it through his questions. So Socrates concludes that true education is simply remember. It's already in there. It's just going to be recovered. It's recovering these innate ideas. Now, Plato doesn't think that this is, unfortunately, it's not like knowledge of maybe useful stuff, like if you were like a pirate in your previous life, like where you buried your treasure, that'd be pretty handy. Or other useful things like locations of old cities, etc. Unfortunately, we don't seem to get any of that stuff for some reason. So in terms of what we get back for Plato, it seems to be only like the math stuff, philosophy stuff, and not even like really particular philosophy stuff. You get things like justice and so on. So he thinks what happens is this. The servant, he claims, initially doesn't know geometry in the sense that he didn't learn it in this life, so Socrates claims, and was never taught. Yet Socrates says, just by asking questions, he's able to get correct answers from the servant. So the servant didn't know, but he did. He had these notions. And a person who doesn't know can have these true notions in there. And then what philosophy does, according to Socrates, at least in certain cases, it recovers them. So by asking the right questions, the person suddenly, gains knowledge, because it in a way, it recovers that file, metaphorically speaking. So where did the knowledge come from? Well, Socrates claims that the person didn't learn it in his life. Socrates claims that he's not telling the person the answers. So he jumps to quite a conclusion, which is this. This person must either have always had it or acquired it. Now, if he always possessed it, he would always know. If he acquired it, he would not have acquired it in this life unless he was taught geometry. But Socrates was told that this person never learned geometry in this life. And so he makes quite the amazing leap, which we've kind of seen, which is this. Since the person was never taught geometry in this life, yeah, according to Socrates, he knows, and here is the amazing leap. He did not acquire the knowledge in this life, so he must have gotten it at some other time, which must have been when he was not, before he was born in this life. So Socrates concludes that because this person can do a geometric proof, he must be a soul, the soul must be immortal, he must have learned geometry, in the Platonic heaven, and that's why he can do the proof now. So he says the truth of all things always exists in your soul is immortal, and it's all just waiting there. You've always known all these things. But you forget them. You just have to be reminded. So that way he thinks he's defeated Meno. Meno says, if you know, you don't need to inquire. If you don't know, you can never know. And Plato comes up with this, kind of crazy workaround where you know, but you don't know, and you can inquire and recover them. All it requires is that you're immortal and you learn stuff when you're hanging with the fools. And again, quite a jump. So what do critics have? Well, critics obviously raise the question, like, wow, that is quite a leap. And in examining the Meno, Plato lays out all the steps there. Critics have argued that Socrates' questions, which don't seem to be like uncovering stored knowledge. He seems to be, you could argue that he's basically leading the person to the truth. Because a person might not have any knowledge, but if you ask the right questions in the right way, you can get answers, even if the person doesn't know them. So kind of the main criticism people advanced is that even if the dialogue is completely honest, which probably is, it still could be just the case that Socrates is asking questions and is giving the person what they need to know to answer the questions, rather than like revealing this mysterious stored information. But the gist of it is Socrates seemed to believe that you are a soul, you're immortal, and you learn stuff when you die. So next time, that opposing viewpoint, we'll look at skepticism. So have a good rest of the day, and I'll see you in the future.